Hi everyone, welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. I'm here today with USA Today best-selling author Russell Nohelty. So thanks for joining the show today, Russell.
Thanks for having me.
So you've done a lot of things in the authoring world, but could you tell me first, let's go through how you got started as being a writer in the first place.
Sure. So I wanted to direct movies. I went to school for journalism in Maryland, and then I spent a few months working on Capitol Hill, and I decided I wanted to make my own stuff. And so I started being like a DP on projects, and that showed me, oh my God, no one knows how to write these things. Then I started writing my projects, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to write these things either. Like, these are not right. But my plan was we were going to produce a bunch of low quality, like low time intensity movies. And then we would use those to get funding for eventually more and more successful movies. And then eventually we'd be making like the kind of movies that we wanted to make. And it's a very popular format in movies, and it's just as bad every time someone says it. And we fell into the classic problem, which is when you make a movie, it needs to be edited. And so we made the movie real quick. I did my part real quick, and then the editing took 7 years. During those 7 years, I moved to Los Angeles. I got a manager. So sat on a meetings, kept saying, I don't have my thing yet. Like, it's coming, until the meetings kind of dried up. And my manager was like, you ever thought about making comics? I read a bunch of comics. I hadn't read one since the 90s and kind of fell in love with it and made complete visual sense to me. Started making comics, and then those take a lot of money and time intensity, but they don't take time intensity on the writing part. You kind of write, send it off, and then like wait for stuff to come. And so during that time, I was like, I'll probably write books. And then I started writing books. I took a bunch of the movie scripts that I written and TV scripts, started writing books and comics and all sorts of stuff for them, and then slowly learned kind of the book writing process and realized that I could write 10 books for every comic that I did, and met a friend in 2017 who kind of showed me what was possible, independent publishing and like self-publishing on Kindle and such. And I kind of went all in on books, and I wrote all these things, and then wrote a bunch of nonfiction because people kept asking me questions about my fiction and how to do it. And I got sick of answering them. And so I kept writing books that answered their questions, and courses that answer their questions, and then doing services that answer their questions, until just like eventually I ended up selling the rights to my nonfiction to Monica, and just kind of like pushing that out in my great like 2020 pandemic clear out. Then she put the books in her book sales supercharge, a lot of my other books. We did this Kickstarter book that became successful, and we built a company on that and off of that, and it's kind of been juggling fiction and nonfiction since. But it's weird because I kind of became successful in fiction, and then like I became successful again in a whole nother industry in nonfiction. So like half of people think that I'm a comic book writer who does nonfiction on the side, and another half think that I'm a nonfiction writer who doesn't do much fiction. And I'm like, 90% of what I've done is fiction, probably now like 80% of the money I've made in fiction. But like all of the things that I talk on and train on are things that like I learned in fiction and made fiction selling work. It just so happens that a lot of the things that work in fiction are things I modified from other industries, which is kind of how I learned how to do most of the things. I would find something that worked in another industry and be like, I wonder how I can make this work in fiction. And about 90% of those didn't work, and like one of 10 did. And I kind of just built a stack of stuff that worked across the board, or worked for fiction in one way and nonfiction in another way. And yeah, that's a long rambling answer of like where I started to where I am. But like it was a lot of plugging needs and holes, and like plugging, like people would ask me. My first part of my career was like trying to figure stuff out, and people were like, I'm trying to figure stuff out. And I would like be like, go away, I'm writing books. And then they would keep asking me to make money, like give me money to do things. So I would keep doing those things. But I'd be like, I'm going to do this and then go away so I can write books. But every time I like opened the floodgates, like I would end up doing more nonfiction, and but to get to fiction. But like, and then it ended up when like Monica and me started Writer MBA, it was like, well, I guess I have to like commit to nonfiction in a pretty heavy way because like now I'm half of a company. And so I have been doing more nonfiction than fiction in the last couple of years, or at least becoming doing more and more launches with nonfiction than fiction,
Yeah.
simply because like I feel guilty when I don't do stuff for Writer MBA because I'm like, I made a commitment to Monica to like make this company work. And I feel like I owe it to her to spend most of my time making that company work instead of writing fiction.
Yeah. So Monica's your business partner for the Writers MBA. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool. So just now you mentioned that you took some of the things that were working for fiction and then applied them to non-fiction. Are you talking about marketing tactics, or is it something else you were
I
talking
mean,
about just then?
storytelling. So, like a
Yeah.
lot of stuff for like storytelling, fiction works really well in nonfiction. A lot of things in marketing, nonfiction works in fiction, but it's not like Monica calls this the novelist dilemma. There's just like a money problem in fiction. It's like no matter how much you fiction you have, you can only sell it for like maybe $10 an ebook. Like you
Yeah.
can't sell the special edition issue where you can now sell a book for $80 kind of fixes that, but like a lot of the costs are like $30 to produce that book to make $80. So yes, you are making a lot more on the special edition side now, but in general it's just very, very hard to make more than $10
Yeah.
profit a book, whereas for nonfiction you can take that and you can make like a course and a podcast and all of these things that cost, and it also costs just a lot more money to make fiction presentable.
Hmm.
You know, like you can make a course and just like screen share your thing, and like it can cost you $3. And like the minute that you're done with that, it's over and you can charge $1,000 for it, compared to fiction where it's like, well, in order to make that saleable, yes, you can do it on Patreon maybe, but like after that, it's like you need to send it to an editor. You need to like get it gussied up. Like you have to get it into a finished state in a way that you don't have to for nonfiction. So like you have both a dilemma of price elasticity, but you also have a dilemma of like finished, like the amount of work you have to do to get a finished product. And I mean, the worst products to sell are low margin, low cost, high competition, and that is 3 for 3 for books. So
Yeah.
a lot of people make fun of people who sell books, saying like, you know, oh, you're just trying to sell fiction, but like it's actually the way harder sales process. Like it's way harder to sell a product that nobody needs. And as much as I love all of your books, nobody needs them. Like they don't need, like no one has a pain point saying, I wish I had another Jane Austen retelling in my life so that I can eat next week. But so it's like in nonfiction, you can say, look, it doesn't matter if you like me. It doesn't matter if like I write well. What matters is if you need to eat, I can teach you how to eat. If you
Yeah.
need a 401k, like if you believe that I can bring you to the transformation you want, then like give me money. And like it is way better, easier to do that when like people, you like somebody, but like it's unnecessary to the process. Like I read tons of nonfiction and they are all garbage. Almost 100% of them are terribly written books that I regret reading, but they do give me the thing that I needed, which is
Yeah.
like the 3 bullet points that like made reading it worthwhile, compared to like fiction where like the reading is the point,
Yeah.
like the escape, like the slowing down, like the imbibe, like it's just a different experience. I call it soul resonance selling as far as pain point selling. And so all of those things mean like fiction is actually one of the hardest things to sell ever, as fiction books especially, because like very few people value books. You're going into a market that you can't charge much, that there's an infinite supply, that you're competing against every single human that's ever come before, and like you can't charge more than $10 really, and expect to get a sale, and like very few people value the thing that you're selling, and like you're competing with every book that ever existed. So like it's just very hard, and it's not impossible, but like I wish people would better appreciate how hard it is to sell like books, like fiction books, because like especially at a time of like high upheaval where like money is tight, like the things that we like and don't need are the first things to go.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, I totally see what you're saying. I was chatting to Dakota Krautz just really recently about this very problem, but he kind of gets around it because his business is very focused on one particular niche, which is that like gaming lit sort of niche. So I guess that could be a way around. If you are focusing on one niche, you kind of can build up your reputation in that industry, so you can build up the readership. Makes it slightly easier to sell the books because
Yeah,
I know
so
that.
what's your, I mean, that's a very grassland strategy from our author ecosystems, but like, so people make a hierarchy, and like, if you're number one, you are the least likely to be cut from that hierarchy when people need to cut a thing, and the first thing that you buy. So, like, if you can find a like lit RPG or whatever your niche is, if you can be like the one person in that niche, maybe the two or the three person, then like when someone has to cut, they're going to start at whatever the ones that they're like, man, I don't know how much I like this thing, like, and they're going to work their way upwards, and they're going to keep the things that are at the top first. As the same thing with Kickstarter. Like, one of the big problems with Kickstarter is like people have $85 and they used to put $85 across 20 projects. Well, now they're putting it across one project because every project's like $100 cost. So like people are finding less books, and they are having to be like the one of one to more and more and more people. But yes, like dominating a niche, but like that is another thing that like if you read Category Pirates or any other thing, like dominating a niche is like a thing from nonfiction. It just so happens to also work in fiction the same way because humans are humans.
Yeah.
Turns out humans are humans, and like most things that they buy, they will buy the same way.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Now, you just touched on Kickstarter just then. I know you've used Kickstarter really successfully, and you know you've also even written the book. You've literally written the book on how to sell your books on Kickstarter. So, could you give us a bit of an intro to how Kickstarter works for authors, and also tell us about your first experiences with it?
Sure. So my first experiences with crowdfunding were actually on this platform called Indiegogo. There
Oh
were
yeah,
two
okay,
failed campaigns that made, I think, like $1,500 total. My first Kickstarter was a book called Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter. It made $5,400, and it was more money than I'd ever made in 1 month selling my own work ever. And it was the first time I was like, oh, I can do this. Like,
yeah,
this is a
right.
thing that is possible to do. Like, it is possible to actually make money doing this thing.
And sorry, just to
Um,
interrupt you. That was a fiction book,
it was a comic book. That was
a comic
this
book, right?
first in our graphic novel series. So almost all of my books until the Kickstarter book were fiction on
Right,
Kickstarter. So I'd made something like $400,000 on Kickstarter before I ever made like $1 nonfiction on Kickstarter.
right.
So Kickstarter is a time-based crowdfunding platform where you are putting something new into the world, whether it is a brand new project or a new spin on an old project, and people can then pledge support for to get a certain number of rewards. The time based one I think is the most important thing when it comes to Kickstarter, when it comes to crowdfunding, because you're trying to make a thing that would not happen, and
Yeah,
so you're trying to coordinate a crowd to like it's very funny because like if you just look at how nonfiction works, like this is how all things are like, we're doing a new cohort of X. Like we got to this, like this thing's live for only 2 days. So it's like they're using the scarcity trigger very well in crowdfunding to like make these special editions and other things happen. It's also a way where you get to support the creator instead of only supporting them like somewhere between 35 and 70%, like on a retailer. In general, what happens is people are doing special edition campaigns or like old editions coming back or like new first in series. We think that you should be putting every series in Kickstarter first and then like moving it through the rest of your pipeline, maybe even putting in Substack before that if you're building your book, or another like subscription platform before that. But Kickstarter should be like the first stop on your publishing journey. We are not the first people to say that. Dean Wesley Smith is coined that thing. Yeah. And then, you're creating a sales page and rewards, and you're trying to figure out like what things people want, and then building excitement for the launch so that you make the most amount of money in a finite amount of time.
Right. Okay. I've seen a lot of Kickstarters like not around books as well, and often say if you invest $50 or $100 or whatever amount, you often get an extra freebie. Now sometimes it's something a bit crap like a baseball cap or something, but sometimes it's something quite cool. Is that like a tactic you've used to try and encourage people to invest a bit more money?
Sure. I mean, or just to not unpledge. One of the biggest things on Kickstarter is to not have people cancel their pledge.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you have a tiered reward system where the more you pay, the more you get. So, like, again, just like any other sales based thing, SaaS product, like you have a minimum, a medium, and like a best. And like you're trying to get people to move from like minimum to best through the course of the campaign. So there are several different reward tiers that you can offer, from like digital to physical to special thanks, and more like expansive goals as you get higher and higher. And then you have weekly rewards, daily rewards, flash rewards that you can give over time for people who back. And then stretch goals, which allow people to unlock things throughout the course of your campaign, depending on how much money you raise. The stretch goals are like, usually most people get them, or at least like the people that get the print edition get them. But I generally prefer weekly goals, which are, if you back by this week, you get these additional perks. If you back this other week, you get these additional perks, and then they compound the earlier that you get. The problem is with those weekly goals or daily goals or any of those things, by the time you get to the end of your campaign, you have like the people that back the last don't really have a huge incentive to come. So then you are using like stretch goals so that those people then have a reason to back because they now have more. So you're rewarding people who are backing the earliest, even though no one gets any money deducted by the end. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's always a balance between how many SKUs you want to deliver and how much it takes to get someone over the edge. So in my last campaign, we did a special edition hardcover for a short story collection, and not many people were backing for the first couple of days. And I realized that I hadn't done our early bird perks, which is usually like a collection of books that I give like people that back early. So they're usually ebooks. And I hadn't announced them. I hadn't said anything about them. And like, I was like, man, this is pulling teeth. What is going on here? Well, like I finally put together like a bundle of books, and like suddenly everyone was backing. So like oftentimes it's like you need to increase, you have two things that you can do. Really, you can lower price or you can increase like value when you're doing a campaign. So it's like, it's very hard to decrease price when someone has paid for it. But like you can do things like an early bird, like price of like $5 off or something like that. And then, but like you can always add value by like adding more books or like adding more rewards or just making it more valuable to buy. And eventually you'll find that equilibrium where like, oh, someone finally believes it's worth $25 or $10 or $1, like whatever the number is. Like, once you believe that my work has value, now we're just negotiating how much value that is.
Mm.
But like before that, you have not agreed that my work has any value. Like, if you have not bought anything from me ever or spent any time with me ever, if this is the first time you're hearing of me, you do not believe my work has any value. And that's okay. Like, first I have to convince you that like I'm a valuable human. Part of doing that is like, hey, Teddy thinks I'm got something valuable to say. He may be regretting having me on now as I've been rambling for like half an hour, but like he believed it, and that's what we use. That's what we call authority. I
Yeah.
am borrowing his authority, and you have trust with Teddy, and so like that is the first thing is like, hey, do I have value for free? Like, will you sign up for my mailing list? Will you go to the author stack? Will you join my community because you think there's some value there? And like, maybe not money value, but like some sort of value.
Yeah.
And now my first thing is like, okay, now you're at the author stack. Now maybe you upgrade and like become a paid member. Now maybe you buy and like once you do that, even if it's for $1, now it's like, aha, you do think there's value here. I just now have to like expose how much value there is. I just have to show you how much value. So you keep giving me money over time. And so like, as you're stacking on your value for your Kickstarter, at some point, someone's going to be like, okay, yes, I admit there's $1 of value here. And you're like, cool. Now, if I 25x this, there's $25 of value here. Now we're having a very different conversation than being like, I could put 10 tentacle kitty. I could put everything on this desk in here and be like, will you give me $1 for this? Will you give me $1 for this too? What if I put this and this and this and this and this? Well, you could stack a thing up to the ceiling and still be like, nope, wouldn't give you $1. And it's a very different conversation that we're having once you're like, okay, this feels worth $1. And you're like, okay, I see you doing this. Does that mean like the weight is the important part? Like, could I put just like 4 books in your hand and would that be as valuable? And you might say, I don't know. And we do it and you're like, yeah, this feels about as valuable as this. Like, okay, cool. So like you think 4 books is worth $1. Awesome. Like now how do we change that paradigm? How do I make 4 books worth $100? And like that's really that's how I think about a campaign. We call it the 50-50, which is a reward should be 50% profit and cost 50% of what the value is or less. So like if you make something for $50, it should cost no more than $25 to make, and it should have $100 of value in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's about, making sure you're giving enough value to people in order for them to give you money in the first place, because obviously you're a bit of an unknown quantity at first, like especially like you've got some reputation now, but say people listening to this, they haven't done a Kickstarter campaign before. The people that are going to be launching their campaigns, they don't have any reputation really with the people who could be giving money. So you've got to be providing that value in order for it to make any sense for them to give it to you.
What's so interesting because like, if you think about like Amazon,
Yeah.
like the same, like Amazon has value in just like, it's very easy. Like people on your Kindle are like, well, it's worth downloading the KU book. And it's like, well, like the value doesn't have to be very high if they already are in KU and already have a Kindle and you write in a genre that they like and they recognize your name and like they read a chapter and they like it. Like they can burn through your whole catalog. Like there's very little value that has to be present there for like that action to happen. I'm not saying your books don't have way more value than that. I'm just saying most authors are still in KU, and and if not there, most authors are on retailers. And so the relationship, the value that someone has to have when they're like, oh, you're already on this. Oh, look, you're in the wide bundle thing on Kobo. Like I got a Kobo reader. Like I just go boop boop, and like now you'll have your book. Awesome. Like I buy so many books and just like being like, I don't even know. You seem nice. Like boop. Like I did this to a friend. I met at NINC who I hadn't seen in like 10 years. I was like, oh, cool, your books are on Chirp. Boop. Now I know what I'm reading this week. And I'm like, I already used Chirp. So like most people have never actually ever thought of this when they're a writer. Like they have never had to ask like what value even means. But when they do like a sale or when they do something like a Kickstarter, they're like, it's not working. And like the first thing that I ask them is, what does your audience value? Like, what do you know has value?
Yeah.
Like to them. And like, they'll be like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, like, are you in KU? It's like, yes. So it's like, okay. So like if you were in KU, this book would have downloads or something like that. So like, we need to like change the paradigm of like what value means and understand that like, a Kickstarter campaign or any sale event, first and foremost, is to establish like that your work has value monetarily and where that value lies.
Hmm.
And once you know where like the value lies, then like it's a negotiation. Then now we're like, okay, cool. Like you think my books have value because I write in KU. It's very easy. You go through a book a day. Like you don't really have to like you just want something that, and then you want to move on to the next thing. Cool. Like, well, that's a lot harder. That is a lot harder. That's a lot further ask to get someone to Kickstarter than like I bought your book at a conference. Because
Yeah.
like you're already buying direct. Like you already have a direct relationship with them. But if like let's say that person knows BookFunnel, that KU person knows BookFunnel, you're like, oh, well, like I can just deliver this to your BookFunnel library.
Yeah.
It's just as easy if you're okay with that. And they're like, oh yeah, I know that. So like now you're like, okay, that ease is slightly more, that lift is slightly more. But like if you now know what the friction point is, like where you're, oh, I have to make sure during this launch I tell people we are delivering our books through BookFunnel, or like we're delivering our audiobook codes through Findaway Voices, or like whatever it is, it doesn't like matter. But like what we are negotiating in the first any direct campaign is like, do you really think that my books have value? Oh, you don't. Well, like how can my books have value? Oh, I gotta like do a bundle of books plus this book. Like, oh, my book has $1 of value. Like whatever that is, like when we think about running a sale, and when we think about running a direct sales campaign, when we think about running anything, like the first, like to me, it's like data. I need to know how many people in my audience care, at what level, and like where they care, how they care, and whether they care monetarily or not. Because
Okay.
someone can care very deeply about you and not want to give you $1 for your medical bills. And like those are two very different kinds of caring.
Yeah. When you've been a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Kevin J. Anderson, and he's launched some books really successfully with Kickstarter. And one of his most recent ones is his series of books called Dan Shambles Zombie PI. It's like a funny book about a zombie police officer. But he's got quite a lot of fans to that book. But the reason he does his Kickstarter is because he launches other products alongside them. And in this one, he launched like a card game that goes alongside. Have
Cool.
you launched physical products like that with your Kickstarter in order to, build your relationship with the fans, and also to obviously to make some more sales as well?
I mean, I've done a lot of things in my career that I wouldn't recommend other people doing. Like, I wouldn't recommend you like make a card game unless your books are successful already. Like he launched several Dan Shambles books before he did a card
Yeah.
game version
No, he
of
did.
there.
Yeah.
So like we've done card games, like we've done other products, but in general, like I just want to get the book out there.
Yeah.
Like we've done a coffee brand integration, we've done so yes, like we've done a lot of other things on Kickstarter, but like in general, that is a very advanced move that
Okay.
I would not recommend to most people.
Cool. That's good advice, at least. So if people are starting out, what are good things to offer as those extra tiers? Is it mostly extra writing, do you think?
I don't think they should offer anything extra. Like to go
Okay.
back to what we to go back to what we talked about before, like if you're running your first campaign, you have no idea what anybody is going to pay, if anyone's going to pay, and how many. I've seen seven-figure authors make less than $1,000. I've seen people with less than 100 people on their list make $10,000 on their Kickstarter. I have no idea which is which. So like I would do maybe a pin. I would do a special we call them so there's two options we usually recommend. One is an anniversary book, which is I think self-explanatory, but like it's a book that's been out 3, 5, 1, 10 years, and you recover it, you do a nice interior print, and you put it on Kickstarter, and you've now spent maybe $300 doing that whole campaign, and you set a $500 limit, and you're like, I'm going to see what happens. Second is a second chance book, which is a book that was much loved but wasn't loved by enough people. And so you do the exact same thing with them. It's usually like close to an anniversary book. The reason that you do one of these two options is because you already like know that the books work. You already
Yeah.
know that the hardest thing to do in creativity is to prove a story works. Once you prove a story is monetizable, then you just have to just figure out how monetizable it is in what format. And then the work is really like finding a thing that's monetizable. So like maybe you do a pin, maybe you do a print, like maybe you do some interior illustrations. I would keep it very small because you do not know if you want to invest the time, energy, and effort into Kickstarter. You do not know either of the questions that are important to know, whether you like it and whether your audience likes it. So, like, if you like it and your audience doesn't like it, you're going to have to find a new audience probably, or like do a lot of work to get them to like it for the next one. Two is, do you like it? And that's the more important one because, like, if you just dropped 10 grand on a book recovering or spent 6 months on a series and man, only three people buy it, like you are going to hate Kickstarter forever. It's very, 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 very hard to come back from like dropping that much money. But like if you already have a book that is working, that is profitable, then like you should do a thing with it. If it's massively profitable, like if it's the first book of a 30 book series like Mal Cooper did, like yeah, like drop some real money on it because like now you're like testing a known now you're like playing with house money. And that's what I want you to do on Kickstarter to start. I want you to play with house money. Like money like a series that either already is massively profitable and popular in your universe. So like you can use that to be like, hey, remember when series one went and like use nostalgia? Or two, a book that failed to break even and you can use Kickstarter to break it even. One of those two things are going to give you the best, and you probably want to run both, honestly, because you want to see like what the high watermark and the low watermark of a Kickstarter is. And then once you know those things, you can then triangulate like what the next thing should be. But like
Hmm.
I'm not very high on like the current trend of doing these special editions, sprayed edges, custom illustrations inside that cost like 10 grand minimum to do because like most authors haven't made 10 grand in their whole career. Most people don't have enough don't have 100 people that can pay them $100 to make $10,000 back. Like most people are set up to fail in that scenario. But like do I think most people have enough money to make $500? Yeah. Like, I think that like your niece who's in Girl Scouts can make $500 selling cookies. You can probably find enough people to make $500, or barring that $300 work. And like, once you do that, you then have data that you can use to make better decisions next time. That said, I know people that are just like, I'm gonna go in. They're listening to this and like, I know Kickstarter, and like, I'm gonna screw you, Russell. Like, I'm gonna do a $10,000, $100,000 Kickstarter, and then they nail it, and you're like, awesome, man. Like, that's great. Like, I hope that that is what happens for you. What will most likely happen is you will spend the next year building this campaign and anticipate it so hard and freak out so hard and put so much behind of your career and your aspirations behind this campaign that even if you succeed, there is no way that like it will live up to your expectations. And I would rather you just say, what do I got? I got a pen. Like I like pens. Like I like pins. I don't know, I know how to 3D print like little ducks. Like I'm just gonna do a little duck campaign because that's like a cute thing for my book. And like those are doable. Like doing Lego minifigs is like a doable thing that you can do because you can buy them for like $10 and sell them for like $25. Like a pin you can like get a pin design for $100, less probably, and get 100 of them for like another 100, $200, and that's like $300. Like Okay, well, if you lost $300, Teddy, like, I don't know, you probably owe way more than $300 into your author career, right? At this point. So,
A little bit,
like,
yeah.
uh, like that new cover. Well, let me tell you, you're probably going to get a new cover for that book one day. Like, if you're an author, like, you probably already want to recover. Like, the minute that your book launches, you're like, I really want to get a new cover for it. Like every author's like that. So like you probably are going to get that new cover. You might as well like just do a Kickstarter for it. And then like you likely are going to get new formatting because you want it to look prettier or a new thing's going to happen or you learn a new trick in vellum. And so like I don't know, you can take the pin. So you can take the pin and use that pin as your custom headings inside your book. And then you take the cover you're already going to use and make a print of it or something. And like, look, you've got like 4 or 5 rewards right
Yeah,
there. And
nice.
like, then if you make your if that 500 becomes 10,000, guess what? You're going to do a lot more Kickstarters. If that $500 becomes $700, like, I don't know, maybe you're like, dang, I learned a lot. Now let me try it again next time. But
Yeah.
in nonfiction, in not fiction, like in businesses, like they do these little tests all the time where they're like testing the bounds of platforms and ad systems and all sorts of things. But like authors instead are like, I'm going to go all in on Kickstarter. I make $10,000, and you're like, it's not like a great test of
Yeah.
like to I would rather you do 10 different Kickstarter tests and find out what really works, because if you do 10 of them and they each make $1,000 $1,500, you're gonna learn a heck of a lot more than if you run one $10,000 campaign and barely break even and your uncle spots you that final 5 grand.
Yeah. It sounds like you think Kickstarter is actually better for authors who've already got work and maybe using Kickstarter to relaunch some old projects rather than people who don't have any name yet using it as a launch platform for their first book, for example.
Oh no, I think that everyone should make this the first stop in their publishing journey. Every
Right.
single author, from the an author who has 0 people in their audience to Brandon Sanderson and
And for
everyone in between.
so for the people who are like literally maybe it's their first book or second book, first time using Kickstarter, how do you what are the best ways to promote that Kickstarter campaign outside of just it being on Kickstarter in the first place?
If Kickstarter is the first step of your publishing journey, the question is like your real question is like, how do you design a marketing campaign from scratch?
Hmm.
Because like you're going to be on Kickstarter and then you're going to be on retailers and like the book's going to be in all of these places. So like, how do you build an audience from scratch is a more like I think universal thing. It's and the answer to that has been argued and studied like forever from like creators on down. So like you probably need a mailing list. You probably need to figure out at least one social channel that works to give you repeatable traffic. You need to build a network where you can leverage fandoms in different ways. You need to be able to borrow people's authority and let them borrow yours. You need ambassadors who will tell you about, talk about your work other places. You need to be a good steward of your community. Like all of these things are the same things that you would have to do if you were doing a retailer launch. Like people say that all you have to do is turn on Amazon ads for Kickstarter launch, but like that's not like true. like none of that is true. Like you need like people in an audience to like help you push a book when it launches anywhere. What I am saying is like if Kickstarter is the first step in your publishing journey, then like all of the marketing campaign, all of the marketing you already have to do, because this is the big thing. People are like, oh, to a Kickstarter is so much work. And I come back to them and I say, it's actually not. You've just never designed a marketing campaign in your life. Like all of the Kickstarter is like what you would do for a marketing campaign. You would build a sales page, you would have a blurb, you would have copy about each character, like you would have an automation sequence, you would have like a funnel for people to come in and out. It just is like no authors have never done this before because they've been so myopic on retailer and catalog sales, and in that world Amazon and the other retailers are doing a lot of that work. Like they're doing abandoned cart sequences. Like they're doing all of this other stuff. Like they're showing you're also bots so you get into the recommendation engines. All things that Kickstarter does as well. But like what like a Kickstarter does is teaches you how to actually run a marketing campaign and like run a business, not like a catalog sales empire,
Hmm.
which is also a very nice can also be a very nice business. But like if a direct sales or a wide business, even something that's not on KU, you need to have all of the elements that you design in a Kickstarter campaign, rewards, merch, uh, a story that like sells, probably like a sales video, like copy, imagery. All of this stuff is going to be essential for you in the direct sales channels and in the long-term sales of your book. It just so happens that the strategy that we have been taught for 15 years is release your book, run a bunch of ads, and then when those ads don't go away, like just forget about that book forever. And like now
Hmm.
that book is dead to you. But like, if you want to get backlist sales, you need marketing campaigns in the same way that like we're talking about them for Kickstarter. So yeah, I would say that like what Kickstarter allows you to do by putting it first is design all of that marketing stuff that you're going to need later anyway, and then hopefully get paid for it. But like
Hmm.
you're going to be able to make the most amount of money from the fewest people on Kickstarter, so it's probably going to be the best way to build a war chest to break even on a book and then dump that money into your other marketing channels when you launch the other books, which are much more compliant or pliable with ad spend. It's
Hmm.
like Kickstarter's ad spend on Kickstarter is not going to do anything to juice your algorithm. Launches is not going to make you more findable on Kickstarter. There's only like 100 projects and like fiction that are on at any one time. But like if you spend that money on Amazon, like it will actually like help you rank, help you get more visible, help you get into more feeds. And so it's more pliable to ads than Kickstarter is. So you might as well build a mailing list, bring it to Kickstarter, flush out money, take money, use money on retailers, and just treat Kickstarter like another retailer.
Yeah.
When you're wide, like would you say don't launch a book on Barnes and Noble? No, like you would have. Why would you not want to put a book like people like part of people buy on Barnes and Noble, and in the same way, it's like, well, why would you not run a book on Kickstarter? Like people buy on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Is it 50,000 people? No, but some portion of people want that Kickstarter book. And if it's not too much extra effort to do the Kickstarter, then it becomes easy to do the Kickstarter, especially once you have that series going.
Yeah. Great. Now, just now, you also touched on another thing, which was building that author network as one of the ways of like growing your, getting that Kickstarter name out there. Now, I know you've got your conference, which is the Author MBA. Can you tell us a bit why you started that particular conference?
Sure. So Writer MBA is in New Orleans every year. It started with something called the Future of Publishing Mastermind. Future of Publishing Mastermind is for established 5, 6, 7 figure authors who've been doing this for a little while, or people who are really, really excited to grow, because we didn't have a mastermind style thing in publishing. So there are things called masterminds in
Hmm.
publishing that like that are set up in conference style still, which is like speaker speaker audience style. And then there are little masterminds of like 3 to 5 people that gather, and there's like some online things, but like it wasn't like a big like brain trust like you would see in tech, where like everyone comes for like a finite amount of time. They work on their business, they exchange information, vendors and attendees, and everyone is like working to like build out their brains and their knowledge using strategies that like most people haven't even heard of, let alone implemented yet. So we built this mastermind, and a lot of those people were like, this is great. What I would love is a conference that we could like then now speak at and like be part of with like and take this information to like non-mastermind people and like be able to. So we this year started this to take all of those people who were like speaking and like and our sponsors and for the mastermind and be like, well, what would it look like if we like designed a conference for like people in a way that like brought people again intersectionally together from all different kinds of publishing and allowed them to exchange information together. So our conference is very networking focused.
Yep.
It's there are talks, but there's also a lot of time to breathe and to talk with each other, which is the more important part of these networking things and intentionality. We found that there's a huge portion of introverts in our industry that unless you explicitly invite them, they will not come and show up, even if they are invited. So like we want to make sure that there's explicit things that like a huge part of our audience are going to have access to. So while it's not like there's an application for coming to the mastermind, but for the regular conference there's no application. You can just come, and we say like it's really for people who are excited to like grow their business, their author business, to like take advantage of a lot of these vendors. And one of the things about going wide that I learned was like it's very relational. It's way more relational than like KU is or like social media is. Like a lot of the success is due to like knowing the vendors and knowing the people that like are doing the work and like that can get you like promotions and things. And I don't always known this in my like little like Kickstarter bubble, but like turns out that all of the direct sales and people always ask me like, why am I floundering? And I'm like, well, do you know any of the reps? And they're like, no. It's like 80% of the game is like getting these like merchandising options, and 80% of merchandising options is like knowing the reps, and knowing the reps is them seeing you in person so that they know that you're serious.
Yeah.
And like, is that fair? I don't know. I mean, you've got to have a process. So we want to be a place where like all of that stuff happens. And like we are very interested in bringing many different kinds of writers together because we believe that all writers have about 5% of the answer, maybe 10% of the answer of like what it takes to build a career. So like some of it is locked in like other authors, but some of it is locked in journalists and serial fiction and like on Kickstarter and all of the. And if you just we think that we cap out at what we can make, but really we've just capped out at what like that line of business can make us. But like if we just brought in more business, more lines of business, we would keep growing almost forever because like, oh, now I'm bringing in a subscription, and like now I have a merchandising, and look, I have a direct store, and I have all of these things, and like they all add up just like a when you're wide to like quite a large and powerful like business.
Yeah. How many people do you usually have attend the MBA?
We're hoping to have somewhere between 300 and 500. That's what we're set up to do this year. Last year we had like 75 for the mastermind, and so we're expecting to have somewhere around 100 for the mastermind and 300 for the conference. But
is it mostly fiction writers for this, not non-fiction?
I want all intersectional writers to be there. So like if you but like you have to be willing, like I think the thing is like you have to be open to learning from other disciplines of writing. Like that's because like there are things that fiction will teach nonfiction writers, just like there are things that nonfiction will teach fiction authors. And so like we are agnostic to like what kind of writers come and whether you've even written a book or not, whether you've written 100 books or one book. But like we do expect that people are open to learning from, because this is the biggest thing too. The biggest problem with writers is that unless something comes that looks exactly like their book and is marketed in the exact way that they are marketing or think to market, they are not going to do it. And unfortunately, when it comes to entrepreneurship, like it's a lot of it is like looking at like a I don't know, here look, looking at this frog that I'm holding in my hands and like being like, well, like I bought this at a conference and like this is good. I like a tactile, like how can I bring like the elements here into a thing that I know? And most of the work that Monica and I do are translation work between like other areas of business and writer MBA, but we're really excited because the people that end up coming to our conference and being interested in our community are these very, I mean, you could probably like I don't know, like I'm usually like 8 degrees beyond anyone else that I'm talking to. But like Monica and I saw this, like I've been talking about Kickstarter for authors since 2015, and like I've been using it for even earlier than that. So like these are things that like these like forward focused people, these like futuristic people or these like strategic people who like are like, I know there's something out there. I just need to like know what that thing is. And we always say in the conference, like someone in the room has the key to the lock that's blocking your business. I don't know who it is,
Yeah.
but like we try to do this thing called planned serendipity, which is like we bring in very smart people. We have we like encourage exploration and like we give you focus and then like we expect good things to happen, but what are those good things? Like, I don't know. I tell people all the time, it's like I thought as I became more successful, I'd become more like President Business. And it ends up that like I became more like Princess Unikitty. And like Princess Unikitty is great, like, but she basically like battles chaos and like makes it safe for creative, chaotic people to like do their best work and protects them mercilessly. And like very successful Princess Unikitty is, but like I always thought everything was going to be like come from structure and be predictable. And it's more like if enough chaotic elements run
Yeah.
together, then like enough good things will happen. But like I can never plan. Like I could never have planned from our conference, even though I went in with the intention to do a podcast afterwards called the Six Figure Author Experiment. If you told me that Lee Savino would be the person who I hosted that podcast with, I'd have been like, but I'd literally never even met her before this conference started. Like, so like that is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Like you can have an intention, but like you have to be open for like how that intention will resolve at any conference that you go to, like whether
Yeah.
it's Author Nation, whether it's Inc, whether it's like your local thing. It's like if you are to have too structured a thing, you are going to lose that serendipitous moment where you actually find the person who like unlocks the thing for you.
That's interesting because I always try to get. I always have a plan of what I want to try and get out of a conference. I guess it's different if you're attending like as a writer or from a business perspective, but I think it's good to try and think who is it you want to meet, or if it's not a particular person, what sort of person do you need to meet, and what's the struggles you're having at that point.
I think this having the struggle, like I think understanding the struggle you want to overcome is important.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
being able to look at a conference list and be like, okay, there's a bunch of people here that can probably solve my issue.
Yeah.
But like, I think that it's myopic to say, I'm going to meet these four people and one of them is going to like solve my
Sure.
issue. Saying I want to meet these four people is like great. But like, my philosophy is like, I'm going to meet a bunch of people there and like some chaotic gremlin is going to make something good happen and I'm going to leave with like, but I don't want to leave without some sort of resolution on,
Yeah.
as I mentioned at our conference, it was whether I was going to do this podcast. Like I want to do this podcast that I've been talking about for 2 years. Out of Nink, it was like I want to talk to every vendor and go to the Dali Museum, which I ended up doing, and it was great. It's just like a lot broader. It's like a lot broader a scope of success than I think most people have going to a conference. And
Yeah.
also, it's scary as hell to say that thing because you're like, you just want me to like pay thousands of dollars, like trust in the frigging universe to like deliver me an answer to this problem of like how to break through a big block, like that is way too much to ask. And I get it. Like because like I was there, like I've been there so many times. It's only in like 100, like being at hundreds of shows
Yeah.
and like talking to Lee for like dozens of hours and Monica for hundreds of hours, that and like just knowing that like the like more loosely held the thing is, the more you allow the right thing to happen instead of forcing the wrong, like that thing to happen. But like you can't, like I talk to investors a lot. Not that we have investment, but like they're always like, well, what are the metrics that you track? And I'm like, well, I don't know, quality conversations had in a week. Like,
Yeah.
they're like, what does that even mean? And they're like, well, it's more than high. It has to be more than high, and it has to have some meaningful thing exchanged. Whether that is like a hope, a dream, an action point, like whatever. Like something has to have changed hands in that interaction, and like then it's a win. They're like, how does that become money? And I'm like, I don't know, because like, all right, so this is my like hottest. This is one of my hotter takes, and when I say it, people like are go crazy. Like, I have no idea how I make money. Like, I know that if I perform X actions, Y money will come. I know if I create Z product, Y money will come. Like, I know that if I know actions that I can take that lead to money. But like when you actually unpack that, and I open up, let's say the 150 people who bought our bulletins at the end of the world book, every single one of those people had a different journey to get there. They saw a different thing. They had a different experience. And even if they are longtime buyers, the experience they had this time is probably different than the one they had last time and the one they had before then. And so like I can predict that like if I have a mailing list of X size and I make this kind of book, this is the result. I'm
Yeah.
actually very good. I'm actually very, very good at predicting that like bottom number. Like freakishly good at predicting that bottom number just by gut instinct alone. But like if you then said, okay, why did Bob buy? I'd be like, I don't literally have no idea. Like I look at our bank sheet every 2 months or every month and I'm like, how does this amount of revenue equal this amount of money in our bank? Like, I just don't understand. Like, I don't get it. And every time people go, that's not a great thing for a business coach to say. And I'm like, I know. But like, I feel like if we were all really honest with ourselves, we would say, I actually I actually don't know. Like I want to know. I want to pretend like I know like what this answer is going to be, like what I'm going to get out of this conference. But like I just have to trust the people. Like I just have to make a bet on the project or the partnership or like the person holding the conference to be like they're going to deliver something magical and I don't know what that is. And I know that is like Monica is very high woo, and so like and Lee is very high woo, and thus I have become very high woo. But also, the more successful I get, the more people I meet that just like are like it's like chaos. Like it's like I'm bottling chaos, and like I understand the metrics, all of the X and the Y and the Z. But I learned about Gödel's incompleteness theorem last year around this time, which is that for every mathematical formula, one part of it is unprovable at any time.
Right.
And I was like, this is math. This is like the thing that is supposed to be like we're supposed to be able to hold the math, right? It's the only thing of anything like we can hold to math. And even that is like, well, sure, this equation works. But like don't look at it too closely because like it falls apart under even this lightest scrutiny. But like it works. But like don't look at it too hard. Wow, that way went off from like Kickstarter to like way esoteric. But
So if people want to come to the Writers MBA conference, where's the best way to get in touch with you about it or to find out more information?
WriterMBA.com has all of the information. I hope if you're listening to this, and you've gotten this far, you probably qualify for the mastermind. So many people that I talk to, like a third of people that we approve for the mastermind, was like, oh, I didn't think I would get in. To which I will say, probably if you are excited to get in, you probably qualify to get in. Way more people probably disqualify themselves than we could ever disqualify. You also get access to all of our courses if you come to our mastermind. So if you want to hear more of my like esoteric weird business rants, theauthorstack.com is my blog.
Yeah.
If you want to see any of these books, the russellnohelty.com is where all of my books are. But yeah, I mean, if you want to see the Conference Writer MBA, but like, I think the best pitch that I can give is like, if you believe that Monica and or Russell or both are like the right person to curate an experience to like break you through your best block, just like come. And if you don't believe that, then like find somebody, anyone that, well, not anyone, like somebody reputable, and like trust them. Go through their program, go through their process, like just like bet on people, like not on necessarily like engine for that person's teaching.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, some good advice at the end. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much for today. There's been, really wide ranging conversation, starting with the Kickstarter, but ending with, as you said, quite an esoteric business thoughts.
You're welcome. I'm glad to do it. You said you had a final question, right?
So there's one final question, that is a book that you recommend everyone should be reading.
100 Places to Visit After You Die by Ken Jennings, which is a very weird pull, but like he dissects like 101 afterlives, and like I really love it.
So is it like stories of people like that after they've died?
No, so you know how it's a travel guide for afterlives. So okay. Like if you know the book 1001 Places to Visit Before You Die, it's like the same kind of travel guide. It gives travel advice and like breaks down like what each afterlife is. It's so good and so weird, and I cannot believe Ken Jennings wrote it. And like I can't believe we don't talk more about how Ken Jennings wrote a travel guide to afterlives. It is such a weird confluence of events. That like this man randomly went on Jeopardy, won all the Jeopardies, took over Jeopardy, and like wrote a book about the what a weird confluence of events. Like it seems like logical in retrospect, but like it actually doesn't.
Good. Well, that is a really out there suggestion. I've never heard that book, and so it sounds like a bit of me. So I think I'm going to get that one actually.
Awesome.
But most people have recommended on Writing by Stephen King, so this is quite nice to have a bit of a different one.
Well, you said that when you first started, and I was like, well, I can't do that one. Like, not that I don't love like Stephen King. Another great one is Claire Taylor's Sustaining Your Author Career, if you want an author one. It's about Enneagrams and author-edness.
Oh, great. Well, I'll put both of them in the show notes so people can pick up on them. But thanks for coming today. It's been great to meet you. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in Author Nation. And speak again soon.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Publishing Performance Podcast. I really hope you found today's episode inspiring. I love chatting to authors, writers, and people in the publishing world. Now, just before we wrap up, let me tell you about Publishing Performance, the #1 platform for authors who want to increase Amazon book sales, but are not really sure where to start. Now, this show is all about helping you to sell more books. And if you're looking to boost your publishing game and to maximize your book's potential on Amazon, then Publishing Performance is designed to help authors just like you to grow your readership and to reach a much wider audience. Now, I know that Amazon ads can be slightly complicated, which is why Publishing Performance is like having a personalized ad account manager to create your ad campaigns, to choose your best keywords, and to make adjustments in real time. Now, if you're investing in ads, you really want to make sure that your investment is being used effectively, and Publishing Performance does just that. It aims to make your budget go further, improve your organic rank, and target keywords more effectively. Just go to publishingperformance.com to get started with Amazon ads for just $1.